Welcome to the Between Two Wheels podcast, cycling news, commentary, and analysis from Northern California. This is episode 101, and I'm your host, Tyler Janke. Today, we're doing a little bit different. We're going to have an interview episode. You know, there's been bad weather out there in Northern California lately, nasty weather all over the country, and it's, you know, you might still need to get some fitness. Maybe you need to have races you need to be ready for. But bad weather or the need to accommodate your tight schedule has probably forced many riders indoors, and the market and technology has been there to make the most of it. Indoor training has led to indoor racing, and with the advent of online connectability, the gaming world, cycling is taking a whole new landscape and leading to a whole new world. You know, we've heard of Matt Heyman training on Zwift during his injury hiatus and giving him fitness to win Paris-Roubaix in 2016. You know, I've also heard of Zwift races and now their virtual world championships. Well, today we're going to talk to one of the pioneers of this virtual world and taking on the mantle of innovator of cycling as a gaming prospect. I recently connected with Frank Garcia to discuss staying indoors and riding your bike. Frank Garcia is the CEO of CVR, that's Cycligent Virtual Racing, World Cup, and a former competitive cyclist himself. Frank began his cycling, as many of us do, riding his bike back and forth to school, using his wheels to gain freedom. For Frank, it was about getting out on his bike in Arizona and soon to racing crits as a sprinter, which you will hear. With the cycling masses taking on, Zwift and gaming, I thought it would be, try to figure out what's going on and what's coming in the future of indoor cycling and esports in general. Frank definitely has a different view and a different channel that he's trying to take his company. And I hope you'll enjoy this episode of the Between Two Wheels podcast. Please like, share the show, give us a review on whatever platform you use, and give us some comments, good or bad. We'll take and listen to them all. All right, so let's get into the interview with Frank, discussing his early move into the tech world as his cycling career was well underway.
Entrepreneurial family, and so I did software and became a software entrepreneur as well, and then I did really well when I was younger as a software entrepreneur, and so I was able to really just sort of go around the country racing in my late 20s and early 30s, and that was a lot of fun. I'm a sprinter type, so I love to suck wheel and take all sorts of scary chances at the end, in real life racing, when I did it. And I'm a little too old to do that anymore because broken bones take much longer to heal, it seems, these days. But
yes, they do.
Yeah.
So how did you get involved into? Okay, so the world of Zwift comes around and kind of just revolutionizes kind of some of the indoor racing. Well, first of all, just training in general has taken a different whole step up with that. And then, so how did you become involved, and how does your business incorporate like Zwift and these other online training systems?
So what happened was, I was very fit, 4.5% body fat, skinny dude, and, strong. I had strong legs. And then I stopped cycling a lot. And so instead of, 6 hours a day on the bike and eating, tons of calories, I stopped riding the bike, but I kept eating tons of calories, and I got unfit. And then I had a son, and I just playing with him was, a struggle. And I said, okay, well, this is ridiculous. And so, went to get, back fit again. And as I was doing that, my old cycling coach was like, hey, and I went through a couple phases of that, sort of the ups and downs of dieting and that sort of stuff. And so this is a little bit later, but my cycling coach was like, hey, there's this new thing out. Cause I told him I was riding the trainer and trying to do that, more and more. And cause I didn't really have time as a CEO. It's kind of hard to find the time to get out on the road and so on and so forth. And so I was riding the trainer more. He's like, hey, there's this new thing called Zwift. And so I got involved with Zwift, and we set up the second team on Zwift in terms of racing. One of the first people to start racing on Zwift, way back in the day. And that's where that sort of focused. And then what we did was we created CVR World Cup, which is competitive events in real life, right? A league leading up to an in real life event. So we've done events in Las Vegas, London, Paris, Los Angeles, and Vancouver, just to give you a sense. Okay. Prize purses hovering around the $100,000 level. in terms of coming to the events. Give you an example: Vancouver from last year, which was June of last year. I think we paid out what was the highest ladies payout for a race win, over 10K. And we pay men and women equally as well. So that's kind of how it all started. And then we looked at sort of the mechanics of the game, and we said, as we were on the forefront of esports, hey, this is a little too sedate for the esports crowd. There's not things blowing up and, cars
Right.
bouncing off of walls and, all that sort of thing. And so we created our own game to sort of meld these two worlds completely. So you have the physical aspects of the sport, and you also have the sort of fun aspects of games, and a little bit more RNG, as they call it, a little more randomness thrown into the mix. And then on top of that, we add physical equalization, so the genders can race together. All different genders, people of different abilities, old, young, that sort of thing as well.
Well, let's go into some of those. So let's just start with the last one you mentioned here. So you're saying you have a system that basically is like a handicap, like golf would be, for all the genders, so they can race equally against each other. And how does that work?
Well, there's some secret sauce that I'm not going to share about
fine.
exactly how it works. I know how cyclists are; they want to know all the little details. So some of that we keep secret. But basically, what you can think of it as this: what we're doing is matching people's effort levels. So if you're at 80% of your effort level, and maybe that's 500 watts for you, and I'm at 80% of my effort level, and once upon a time that might have been more watts, but let's say that's 300 watts for me right now, then the game is going to normalize that, and we're going to end up racing together. So when you go hard, I have to go hard, so we have a shared experience. But we don't have to have the same power levels. And so the best way I like to highlight this is sort of, being picked for sports when you were a kid. So now everybody can play the game and be engaged, and people who are a little less fit can be really encouraged and motivated to get more fit. Because they're able to be in the game, right? That's the key of the game, and so that's kind of how that works. And the way that we do that is, I won't get into all the gory details, but we monitor everybody's power curve in real time, and we monitor your fitness over the last 90 days, and we take all of that into account, and that creates a profile where we can modify your power in game.
Okay, so. And look, I'm learning about your system as we're kind of going through here. I've done some research a little bit on it, but I kind of want to work through this from a novice perspective to kind of get some of this. So you have this one thing that you just mentioned. Is that part of like a gaming experience, or is that separate from the World Cup events that you have?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both parts. So the game supports. It's highly configurable. So when you get into a game, anybody can create an event. And when you create an event, you can create the event the way that you want. And so, for instance, maybe a newbie, somebody coming from Zwift, wouldn't want to have crashing in the game, which we think is a really key element of the game. But when you start, it's a little bit unnerving when you just get on your bike and you pedal, and you don't have to steer, you don't have to do anything, right? So you can create events all the way from, no crashing, no power-ups, just sort of the standard gaming experience, very simplified, all the way up to, and non-equalized. So you can have those as scratch as well, if you want. And then all the way up through lots of power-ups and crashing and then equalization. So and any part of that continuum you can set up events for. So our idea is the user's rule.
So you have a crash. How realistic is this? Does it just set you back, or does it actually kick you off your trainer? I mean,
so
that's a little facetious over there, but let's really push the levels here. Come on.
Yeah. So the in CVR World Cup, we've actually had people fall off their trainers, and
I've seen that in Zwift too.
Yeah, and so it's pretty funny because I have some people are like, hey, you should have like little electronic mechanism that throws you off the trainer.
Right.
I don't think we'll go there just because the attorneys would, have some deep concerns about that. But what happens in game is like you're going around a corner, and you sort of have to take the apex of a corner. You don't have to, but if you're going fast, you want to. And if you go too fast into a corner, you wreck, and you fall off your bike virtually. And there's about 5 seconds for you to sort of dust yourself off and climb back on, and then you're back into the race, so to speak. But obviously you're set back off from the groups moving on in CVRcade. Now CVRcade's physics are really true to cycling. I think we have the best physics in the games out there anywhere. So let's say if you're looking at Zwift, there's sort of a blob effect, and once you get off, the blob, you can pretty much sign, end of day, wave goodbye. They're going to be, speeding off into the future. With CVRcade, you have a couple of different aspects here. You have the ability, one, it's very much like real life. So the people on the front have to be doing 500 watts. To sort of stay away from you if you're doing 500 watts, unlike some of the other games. And then the second piece is these power-ups help you to get back, right? Because you can burn some power-ups and get back to the group. And again, the idea is you sort of stay in the game, but those mechanics are real. So that's crashing, how it works. A lot of people find crashing very frustrating. No big surprise there. Right. And so this will be sort of an arc over time, but it's what makes the game interesting. And you can also crash by moving into other people. So like if you're switching lanes and there's somebody already there, you crash, those kinds of things. So in a crowd, you have to be careful, just like you do in real cycling.
So your arcade portion, the gaming, or even the CVR World Cup stuff, are you using pretty much the shell of Zwift as your platform, and then you have your own product kind of layered on top of that? Is that kind of where we're at on this?
No longer using Zwift in any way, shape,
no longer.
or form.
Okay. So because I was watching some of your videos, and it looked like that's what they were using. So you have your own complete platform separate at this point.
That is correct. Yes. Okay.
And just kind of a business perspective, is that a lot of investment that you had to look for that, or how did that come about?
It came about sort of yes, it is a considerable amount of investment. And the way that it came about was we were working with Zwift, and Zwift had always said, hey, we're going to go off and do our own esports thing. And you see that sort of happening, now with sort of the KSL, and, they've got some, plans for the future, and they tend to focus on pros, which is a little bit different than what we do. But and so it just became clear that they were going to go do their own thing, and that we should probably go do our own thing as well. And that's where we went our separate ways.
Okay, so I'm not really adept at my friends and teammates stuff do a lot of Zwift. I personally haven't jumped into that world yet, but I do know a little bit about it. How many different race courses or worlds, or however you select them, do you have, like, as not necessarily in comparison with them, but of your own?
So it's really hard to compare the two because there's this a really popular feature inside of CVRcade is the ability to build your own tracks. So we have a track builder inside of CVRcade, and so people can go and they can build a mountain climb that they like, or they can just build a course that they think is cool, right? That has rollers and has a climb that they think they're particularly well suited to, or whatever. So we already have like 7,000 tracks. So our problem is a different problem than, let's say, Zwift. So Zwift would have a much smaller number of tracks, and then you would see a difference because they tend to have some selection, but it's sort of a narrow selection of 2 or 3, right. And then we would have the problem of how do you pick from 7,000 tracks, right? And we have themes in games, so we have like a fantasy theme and a road theme and a mountain bike theme. So that's how we sort of narrow those down, and then we have what we call high-res worlds, where we would have created some worlds as well. But we already have, thousands of kilometers of track, in the game. Now, at any given time, probably a much smaller portion of that is being used. But you can see what'll happen. Like we see teams in the future creating like a stadium, if you will, but their own track, and then having people come to the different tracks. And so we would expect the teams to set up a track that's conducive to their strengths, right, and maybe accentuate other teams' weaknesses, and then you sort of go from track to track each week, right? So you get a home field advantage.
Right.
So some stuff like that. So it's quite different in its approach.
So with the there's out there people concerned about, I'm just going to use the word Zwift because we've had that Zwift doping, which is the weigh-in, and when you're doing this at home, and I've seen your CVR events where they're there in person but then doing them virtually, and obviously it would be a more controlled environment that way. Is there what do you do for weigh-in, or for people that kind of start me in that direction, if you know what I'm
so this is so one thing to understand about CVR is we've been in virtual racing from the very earliest days, right? I mean, like, we were there at the beginning of this, and so we've really come to understand it. And I would say that it's a dirty little secret, except it's not a secret at all, right? Like, you talk to any I'll say real cyclist, right? And the first thing they're going to talk about Zwift is, sort of this Zwift doping, whether it's, I call it self-handicapping, is my euphemism for it. But people, whether it's, cheating on their weight, or knowing that one trainer works better than another, in sprints, or, so on and so forth. And so when we looked at that, and we built CVR World Cup to begin with, and I won't get into all the rules that we had, but there was a significant amount of rules, and we had to end in a live event, right? But still, you had the potential for people self-handicapping, or sometimes they weren't even self-handicapping. Sometimes they were on a piece of equipment that they didn't realize had issues, and everybody else would realize it had issues, and then they did perform very well, and then they wouldn't, right, on a different piece of equipment. Well, that's also one of the reasons we built physical equalization, because physical equalization takes all of that and just makes it a moot point, right? With physical equalization, the more you try and cheat, actually, the more you would hurt yourself, because you create this bigger and bigger power curve. And then we could see that too. I mean, like, if you were at 500 watts one day, and 600 watts the next day, and 700 watts the next day, and then 800 watts, I mean, obviously, that's not human performance. And so we could call that out very easily. So physical equalization not only lets people play together, but it also lets them play together fairly. And we think that's a huge deal. And more and more people will realize that as we go forward.
How do you monitor that? You're saying, you're looking back months or days back on when logged into the system and using it, that you were able to look at that?
Yeah, so we're capturing we're capturing your cadence and your heart rate and your power, once a second, actually a little bit more than that, and we're storing all of that over the course of time. So we have these, huge databases developing, and then we can, analyze curves and analyze how people are doing against one another and all those types of things. Okay,
so you have really interested in this World Cup thing. So it happened in 2018. Are you doing that again for the next year? Is this going to be ongoing?
It is going to be ongoing. We actually have some really big announcements coming. I can't share just yet, but what I can tell people is that CVR World Cup is going to be bigger and better, and on bigger prize purses, bigger stages, more streaming, lots of people watching. And our focus is what we call esports for everybody. Okay. And so our concept is, rather than trying to highlight whose dreams have already come true because they're pro cyclists, right, is to do a true esports environment where anybody, like some person in their garage who never would have been discovered, because there's a lot of things that have to happen for you to become like a world-class athlete. First, you have to be genetically gifted. Second, you had to have had the inclination somewhere along the way. Then you needed to get introduced to the right people who could foster that inclination and that genetic ability, and put you in contact with the right people, and and then the politics of it all, and so on and so forth, right? So we see that sort of as a closed environment. And we want this to be very open, like, hey, anybody can jump in here. And you see this already in these other platforms like Zwift, which is you identify people who are truly gifted. And at first people would doubt them. And now people are coming to understand that, no, like some of these guys are genetically gifted. They just didn't, have the same opportunities or didn't have the inclination to follow them because they're fathers or whatever. And so you see that difference. And so those are the people we want to focus on. We want to create stars. We want to see the storyline. We want to see, sort of the grand failures and the grand triumphs of people just, going all in and see what happens in the esports world.
So, yeah, and what you're saying there about creating people, we saw this with the world. I don't know if it's Zwift or if it's just World Championships or how they have that. One of the guys that won that, I think his wife had stage 4 cancer, so he was staying at home a lot. That was kind of his training idea. Some other people have got pro contracts after doing their Zwift stuff. So commend you for that. Now, how do they get involved and to get up to these big events where you're saying they're paying out a lot of money? And we'll talk about whether you're getting the money for that. And then is your audience kind of a twofold? Is it not only creating the cyclists who can be, these amazing stars, or is it kind of an audience to participate and watch?
Yeah, there's really there's 2 distinct groups here. So there's the people who I'm going to say are the game. Well, maybe 3 distinct groups. So we see the cyclists, obviously, who get into this, and they're already. I'm going to call most cyclists hardcore, right?
Yeah.
Ultra endurance sport. We like to suffer. Most people don't get it. Right. When I would tell people that I was happy, I took an easy day back when I was competitive and I only rode for 3 hours, they were like, what? So we're all pretty hardcore and we're all used to that. And so obviously we want to appeal to a lot of those people for lots of reasons. One, their primary demographic, and also they have the equipment already. Right. So that makes sense. Then you have the gamers we're trying to appeal to. So one of the things that we went to when we created CVRcade was it had to be fun as a game. Like if I just sat with a controller, and we have a mode where you can just sit with a controller, then it needed to be fun as a game so that gamers would get it. And the reason that we wanted to do that is because we wanted to pull in more people to cycling. Right? We wanted to introduce people to cycling in a different and unique way, and then pull them in almost, it's not a bait and switch, but it's almost like a bait and switch. You come for a game, and pretty soon you're getting fit, and it's a whole different experience for you, and that opens up a whole nother world for you. And so we want to pull a lot of people into cycling that way. So that's the people who will use the software. Now, the people who will watch it, right? Yeah. It's a whole different thing. And so one of the things that we wanted to do there, and we think this is absolutely key and a key differentiator from what we're doing against what other people are doing, is I just saw an article which is cycling is the 8th most boring sport to watch. And we've seen that, like when we took our stuff to the streaming platforms, the esports streaming platforms, like people would be like, where's the gameplay? I don't get it. Like I'm watching a whole bunch of dudes, and or women, riding in this pack, and, they're not falling off their bike and they're not crashing. And, it's interesting. They would be captivated by the physical essence of it, of what people were doing and how they were going hard and sweat dripping off. But they're like, the game is like that's boring, dude. And so we said, okay, we want to have both of those things, right? We need to have that physical connection, but it also needs to be, the sport itself needs to be exciting. And I think we've done a very good job of balancing those two, the sort of the physical cycling aspect and the gaming aspect. Now, it's going to take a little time. Cyclists are a little bit, shall we call them traditionalists, perhaps, in some ways. And so it'll take them a little time to pick that up. But as they see that arc and they see what it does for cycling over the long haul, we think they'll absolutely come along.
So where's the money? You talked about being able to pay out some pretty good prizes. Where's the money coming from?
The money comes from, well, first of all, we should talk about the marketplace a little bit. Sure. And so the esports market is just exploding. So you see that with Zwift. as well,
Right.
and they're trying to capitalize on it in a certain way, and we're trying to capitalize on it in a different way, as I just highlighted. But this space is incredibly hot, so people are dumping money in to this space, hoping to latch on to the people who will be successful over the long haul, and that's where the money's coming from.
Okay, so it's sponsors, and I also saw it was on your website. Hunter Allen, is he involved, or is he just promoting it in kind of I'm a coaching and this is something to do? Was he involved in anything official?
He's very involved.
Okay.
And so he is a partner with the organization, and I mean that in every sense of the word. And he helps us develop. So we have workouts inside of CVRcade, as an example. Those are developed by Hunter, and there's periodization plans, and I won't get into all of the the gory stuff. But
I don't mean to stop you, but curious here. So you not only have the gaming aspect where you can go and compete, but then you have people who there's Trainer Road, there's all these other ones out there that can have specific platform and training programs. Is you're saying that's what Hunter's offering in your system as well?
That is correct. Yes.
Oh, okay.
And
good.
And what we'll try and do that's different than everybody else is add a gaming flair, and the gaming flair isn't all there in our workouts right now. And so people will see this arc go over time, but we want to make one of the things that we look for in CVRcade is what we call flow state. And flow state, the best way for me to sort of make clear what flow state is we ask people when they get off of CVRcade, how long do you think you worked out? And they usually pick about half the amount of time they actually worked out. So that's the first thing to understand about CVRcade. And the way that happens is you don't want to crash, and you're paying attention to the corners, and you're paying attention to other riders that are near you, and your mind is highly focused, right? So it's not sort of this experience where you could watch a movie or you could watch a soccer game while you were on your trainer.
So
right?
this like when I'm telling my boys that you can only be on the games for another 30 minutes, and they think they did, but it was like an hour. Is this kind of the same?
That is exactly it. That's spot on, right? And so, but now think about this. If your kids were doing physical activity, you might be like, yeah, it's okay. Go for an hour, right? It's okay, right?
Right.
And they would be stoked because, one, they would only think it was a half an hour, and two, they would be having a lot of fun. So when we build stuff, and workouts are the same way, they're not quite there yet, and they're coming along. We're in beta, but that's the idea, so that when you get on and you do a workout, that you're having to do these turns and you're having to do other things, and so now you've doubled the length of time of your workout. You had a good time, you got more fit, and that's where we're heading with what we're doing in terms of flow state and workouts. Gotcha.
So is there any kind of, are you trying to build the arcade up more than the World Cup, or are these symbiotic? Do you see them, or is there separate entities for this, or is this all kind of just pushing along? And then let me ask you this question. So when you're doing the CVR World Cup stuff, and I know you said there's changes coming, you are picking specific type of events. You're not allowing them to select one of these 7,000 plus different courses. Is that correct?
Oh, that's a good question. So no, we are selecting them. However, that being said, we have analytics going, data analytics going, and we see what people like, right? So all these events get set up, all these different tracks, but just like anything else, the cream rises to the top, and we see what people enjoy doing, and so those are what we build CVR World Cup around. And it's very much a symbiotic relationship, which makes it a little bit tough on us because there's a lot of things that we have to do sort of at the same time. So in the game, there is audio and video. So first of all, you can talk to people, and you can have channels, and so you can have a team channel, or you can have a track channel where you're talking to anybody on the track. But we also have video built in. So literally you can push a button and it'll turn on your webcam and it'll stream you. Well, why do we do that? Because that's part of what makes esports interesting, physical esports interesting, is the physical aspect. So we want to be able to capture that video coming in and broadcast it out in esports. And so all of those things, work in succession together, and we push all of those along as we go.
Talk to me a little bit about the structure of, so you're someone out there, I saw on your website, it said it's going to put you in, if you're doing the CVR World Cup stuff, it's going to put you in different categories. If you've never done it, you guys place them. Is this something where they would have to be riding a lot on your system to actually, how do you place them if they've never done any of the racing?
Right. So you have to sort of, you don't have to sort of, you have to join the league,
Okay.
And you have to race the league over time. And there's typically a preseason, and that's where we're sort of monitoring you and your power curve and monitoring your effort levels and, taking into account, heart rates and other things to understand what your effort levels are, quickly, but it takes us a little bit of time to sort of establish what your power curve really is.
Will you raise and lower people from those categories based on that during the league play?
Yes. And so, and there's really two sides of this. So you can think of scratch as needing categories, and then you can think of physical equalization as removing all of that, right? Because now everybody can race together, right? And that becomes a little bit more of a skill thing. And I think when we talk about it, people are like, oh, well, then if we're exactly equal, then the physical aspect is not really very much a part of it. It's just I'm playing a game and it's about the controller. And it's like, no, like anybody who's done physical activity for a while realize you have good days, you have bad days, you have days that you're on, you have days that you're off, and sometimes you have the force of will to keep going when everything hurts and and you just want to stop, and that's the beauty of the game, right? So this physical aspect very much intertwines with the skill aspect, and so that's that's an exciting element of it.
On the physical equalization thing, so that sets a precedent coming into an event, and then during that event, it's not being readjusted. Is it set in place so that you have this going in? So, or does that make sense to that question?
Yes, it does. In fact, so what we do when we first built it, one of the things that we did is it would sort of like every 5 minutes it would update your power curve. Well, so if you were on a good day, by the end of the race, right, it would be penalizing you, right? That's not good. If you're on a good day, you should be experiencing your good day. So we stopped doing that, and we do it once a day. So we adjust it once per day, sort of in the middle of the night, depending on where you are, right? You can think of it that way. And so each day when you get into an event, your power curve doesn't change, but each day it changes. Now, as you get closer and closer, as you go week through week, there's a couple of things that happen. One, your power curve, remember, lasts 90 days. And so you just did the league. So your power curve is typically set unless you're going to have a breakout day, the day of the race, which is possible, right? I mean, it's the big event. You're peaking for it. We take that into account. But if you somehow like doubled your power, we'd call foul. Right. On the day of the event, because that doesn't happen either. So
that's like a virtual drug test. Is that kind of?
It is. So we're watching your activity all the time, and we're monitoring all of your different metrics and how you normally ride and all of that sort of stuff. And if you got way out of that bounds, then we'd say that's out of bounds, literally. And so there's a lot that goes into this.
Do you have an idea of how many, I guess it would be, what is it, subscribers, league participants that you have currently, and how that has progressed over the last few years?
So I'd have to look at the latest numbers, but think about between 5,000 and 7,000 league participants, and that's sort of the base. And we expect that to grow dramatically over time, but that's sort of the starting point.
Is there anything you guys have, like, okay, Zwift, you have to get your certain, maybe a dongle or something to set it up, or your smart trainer. How do you connect with yours? Is there specific gear that you need that someone would need to do to start with your process?
It's very similar to Zwift, so sort of the same equipment, right? Like, so like if you were in Zwift, you could just hook up to CVRcade. We're free to play, so there's no subscriptions or any of that sort of thing. It's more like Fortnite would be in terms of like pay for cosmetics and that sort of thing. So, and you mentioned Hunter earlier, and so if you like the workouts, you can get a pass for Workout Pass, and that costs some dollars as well. So people can take a look at that. But basically, the game is free, and you can just get in and race. And so, for instance, for the World Cup, you can literally get involved in the World Cup with no money involved, and you might get tens of thousands of dollars on the payout. So that's not a bad deal.
You had mentioned before about maybe a trainer that someone uses is helps them or doesn't help them or whatever. So what do you do on the World Cup events? Do people bring their own? I know you have the equalization thing that helps, but are you supplying kind of even more level in the field of like, here's just your platform, bring your bike, or what do they do when they get to
so we work with the manufacturer. So in all of the World Cups previously, everybody's on the same equipment. It's all been calibrated by the manufacturer, and so any of those differences are removed in real life events, and so that changes things substantially, so that everybody's on an equal playing field.
They just bring their own bike, though, I would assume.
It's interesting.
Or not?
And so, well, I think you're probably a hardcore cyclist. I always took my own bike everywhere. I would never,
right.
Like, I would never ride somebody else's bike or, rent one or anything like that. Just didn't do that. And I'm surprised about half of the people do that, and then the other half are a little like, hey, I'll ride whatever, and they'll rent from a local bike shop, or we'll help them rent from a local bike shop. So it's interesting that way. So that sort of tells you there's already sort of these differentiations of the groups that race, and so people have a different take on it. Well,
and back when you and I were probably racing earlier when we were younger, a lot of bikes were custom, or every little thing. But now it's kind of a small, medium, and large bike, and so maybe it's easier for them to fit themselves. At least if they have their numbers and stuff, they can dial it in. But you don't have any bike sponsors yet. It sounds like that you would just here's a bike, and we'll have you fit for the event.
No bike sponsors yet.
Okay. Anything you wanted to put out there that we haven't maybe addressed, that you just wanted to let everyone know about your product?
I think that one of the things I think we've hit on all the topics, in terms of free to play and physical equalization, but also for everyone to realize that the payouts, for genders and everything are equal. And one of the things that's very interesting that we see is in terms of viewership. In terms of our audience, and we didn't talk enough about that earlier, so I'll probably mention that because I talked about the two groups, but you have the spectating group, and the spectating group is different, right? And we're certainly appealing to that group. And what we found that's interesting is the viewership for CVR World Cup is a little higher, not a lot higher. It's very close, but it's a little higher for the women. And because of that, interestingly, for instance, in LA, I think it was, the women actually got a little bit more of a payout than the men. So actually the women were a little bit higher. And that's because we do cheering, and people, when they're watching, can contribute sort of a la Dota, if you will, some of the other esports platforms. And the women brought in more money. Right. And so we see
these would be akin to like a crowd preem type of thing for the e-rider.
Yes, exactly. Right. All happening over the internet. Right. So thousands. So these preems end up being thousands of dollars that get added to the overall prize purse for both the men and the women, for instance, at the last major, which was in Los Angeles. And so anyway, it's a very, very exciting times. We see both areas growing dramatically.
When does the new season begin? What's kind of is it off season for outdoor riding, or when is that?
Yeah, so we do basically 4 seasons per year. We see a little bit less of the seasonal aspect because we're also a game. Right. Okay. And so that changes the dynamics a little bit. It's not like, oh, I don't want to ride my trainer, I just want to ride outside kind of thing. It's like, oh, let's go be social and talk to people and, in different places and ride the game. So that's a little bit different. So we do 4 seasons per year. We're currently in preseason. And that preseason will last probably another 4 weeks, and then we'll fire up the regular season, and then we'll have the postseason, and then the in real life event probably hit right around early to mid-June.
Okay, so you're starting to ramp up. ending in June for kind of the big finale.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And is that you plan on going several years out still? I imagine that's, we'll wait for your big announcement. Maybe that'll solve all our problems.
Well, there's a lot of stuff happening in the esports world. And so, we can't say yet, but I think it's exciting times.
Gotcha.
So I think everybody should enjoy this because some companies will make it and some companies won't. But there'll be a lot of investment, and I think it'll be lots of fun for people to sort of enjoy riding this wave.
What's interesting about your platform here is, from what I can tell and what we were talking about here, I have 2 teenage boys that play video games, but they also spend time watching people play video games. I know, number one, YouTubers type of people, make millions of dollars playing video games, and people are watching their product. So you mentioned, and you just went over it, that is part of the group that you're looking to attract still, is that audience. And you said it was boring to watch cycling on TV so your esport, your arcade game, you're looking to build an audience. Is that part of it too, of just a participation full 360?
Absolutely. Right. So let's take, your standard sort of Zwift demographic, right? It's sort of, I'm going to say your, 38-year-old male is sort of the standard, Zwift demographic. And there's lots of good things about that demographic, and we certainly want to pull that demographic in. But we also want to expand the demographic to women, pull in way more women, and we want to expand the demographic to younger people. And we also want to be able to, so for instance, I've been riding my bike forever. And my wife, while physically fit, whenever we would go out on a bike, it was, pretty miserable for me and pretty miserable for her, right? I mean,
Right.
I would try and go slow, and that would seem too hard for her. And we'd go up a hill, and, anyway, anybody who's ridden with people of differing abilities. And so we can bring all that together, and then you can watch it, right? And so what you see, for instance, what we've seen in CVR World Cup is the women are every bit as much as compelling when you're up close and personal, and you see them suffering every bit as much as the men suffer, and putting in, just as much effort. And you see sort of the, the pain and the triumph on the faces, and that pulls people in, and then you make it fun to watch. And we think of it in terms of like plays. So like if you were to watch League of Legends, or for that matter, NFL or NBA or whatever, what makes these things exciting is there's plays going off all the time, right? And you can cheer that one play. You don't have to watch the whole event, and it's not just, watch the Tour de France for 6 hours, and then, really what you're doing is you're going to watch the end of the climb or the sprint, or, or whatever's happening. So how do we extend that viewership and pull people in for that entire time, especially people who aren't cyclists? Right now, I can watch marathons. My wife's like, how can you possibly watch a marathon? That's the most boring thing ever, right? And same with cycling. But I know what's going on for those people. I know how much they're suffering, and you see them fade a little bit, or you see them, start to get a second wind or whatever. And so, like, if you're really dialed in, those things can be enjoyable. But if you're just your sort of standard, NFL, NBA audience, and a lot of those people, get highly into it, but a lot of the people are sort of out on the cursory, and you need to give them something to keep them engaged, the entire time, versus it's all going to happen at the end.
This might be a bit of a softball question, but cycling itself, we see road cycling has, there's suffering, events declining as far, some getting not canceled, some, the viewership is going down, or ridership is going down. Is this the future of cycling for you? Or, I mean, I know there's a gaming aspect and you've got a technology company, but do you see this as kind of the future of cycling?
I do, but I also think cycling, we've been around cycling long enough, right? And we saw sort of the, dare I say it, sort of the Greg LeMond and then the Lance Armstrong era. And so you see cycling sort of rise, ebb and flow in the US. And then, you saw Team Sky and, Froome and all of those in the UK, and it gets really big there. So it's interesting. Cycling has this ability to sort of ebb and flow. And so I think this is what's going to happen. And this is what we're sort of after, is pull people into the virtual environment. And a lot of people will stay there, but a lot of people will be like, oh, you know what? I kind of want to go out and ride my bike and see how it's different, right? And they are different experiences. And so we see it growing in that way. Now, it's interesting, and here's what we also see. So we created these themes. So we have this sort of fantastical theme, and The reason we created that is because it's more gamer, and it's allows us to have like tractor beams and power-ups that don't make any sense when you're just riding your bike, right?
Right.
And so those are different. And so we created a road theme because I'm a road cyclist, and why anybody would ride a mountain bike just befuddles me. Right. But we created a mountain bike theme because there's a lot of people that like that. And wow, that's really captured the imagination. So you can, come in and do bunny hops over logs and that sort of thing in terms of CVRcade. And now people like this difference, right? You can ride your road bike today, or you can ride your mountain bike, or you can go, ride around Saturn and just be, totally in an alien world, or, or whatever. And I think that's going to energize a lot of people. It's going to pull them in. And then I think that will grow cycling on the road, or mountain biking, right? Just outdoor cycling, let's call it, as well as indoor cycling.
Gotcha. Well, we've been talking today with Frank Garcia, the CEO of Cycligent Virtual Racing at CVR. Frank, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us and to just give us an idea of what's out there besides just the road. And if anybody wants to get in contact with your company or check your system and your CVR out, how would they do that?
CVRworldcup.com or CVRcade, that's CVRcade.com.
Okay, and we'll link to all those in our show notes. So thanks once again for joining the Between Two Wheels podcast. Check us out on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, wherever the podcast may be found. And once again, Frank, appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.